go. That clock says no, so we're going to go. Nehemiah 4. I feel like we're missing a lot of people. You guys look around, does it just I don't know who's missing, but it is more empty than I'm accustomed to. Well, I know one, and I know a couple of them. Left one of them at home. All right, let's go ahead and pray. Father, we humble ourselves before you. We are grateful for another day that you have provided to us. We are grateful for this opportunity to delve into your word, to examine your people, and how you interacted with them and how they attempted to be righteous. This is our prayer in your Son's name. Amen. All right, Nehemiah 4. Immediately block it. There it goes. Okay. Chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. Chapter 4 is all about opposition. So we broke it down. I broke it down into 3 different categories. I gave us a tiny little map because I wanted Arabia to be in there, and that is hard to find. So we took the big map from the first slide and zoomed it way in, so at least we've got a little bit of Arabia so we can comment on it. All right, Nehemiah 4, we're going to go through it, and then we're going to continue our discussion of the Messiah. I'm going to make some challenges tonight. We're going to get into arguments of why the Jews did not believe Jesus is the Messiah. And so I want you guys to come up with some arguments against it. Now, I understand I'm putting you on the spot. So if you don't remember the verse, that's fine. Quote it. Somebody will Google it. But that's what I want us to start thinking of. This is their reasoning. And we're going to look at some of their reasoning from before Christ, which was a lot of what we've already done, during the time of Christ, during the Middle Ages, and today, why they are rejecting Jesus as Messiah. So we'll get into that towards the end. Chapter 4. First 6 verses. When Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. He said in the presence of his brothers and of the army of Samaria, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish, and burned ones at that?" Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, "Yeah, what they are building, if a fox goes up on it, he will break it down, their stone wall. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads, and give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captives. Do not cover their guilt, and let not their sin be blotted out from your sight, for they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders." All right, Sanballat and Tobiah are re-entering into the story. Sanballat is of what nation? You're right. No, a little more south. Samaria. Yes, I think he's officially called like a Horonite or something from Beth Hor. I think that's the words that they use. But he is in Samaria. So that's why it says when he begins to speak in the presence of his brothers and in the presence of the army of Samaria, that's where he is when he is upset about the things that are going on. Tobiah, we talked about Tobiah a couple of weeks ago, gave us 2 options. He's either an Ammonite or he's a Jew. So what are the 2 options? How can he be one or the other? Marriage. Is he an Ammonite who married in, or is he a Jew who married out? Either way, the writers of Nehemiah call him the Ammonite to re-emphasize this is an enemy of Israel, not just an enemy of Nehemiah. Okay, so Sanballat, it's pretty typical smack talk coming from him. What are they doing? Look how pathetic it is. Are they going to get it done in time? No, it's worthless. Tobiah's arguments pretty much are spot on. I mean, if a fox goes up and steps on it, he's going to break it down. Now, that is insulting. Got to watch out there. In just a little bit, they're going to come up with, David-level insults. But I like Nehemiah's response. Nehemiah does not speak to them. We get no edicts that are given out. In fact, nothing leaves except that Nehemiah has a prayer to God. And Nehemiah says, hear what they're saying, hear how we are despised, turn their taunt back on their own heads, let them be exiled, taken captive into a land that is not theirs. Do not cover their guilt, and do not let their sin be blotted out from your sight. Why does he say that twice? Do not blot or cover their guilt, and do not let their sin be blotted out. Why not just say, remember the bad stuff, or look at their sin? Okay, it does emphasize, but it emphasizes it Jewishly. Why would that be an emphasis to a Jewish mind? Who remembers their Leviticus?
And then there's blotting out iniquity. You can sacrifice to have it blotting out.
Yep.
You can overlook or cover iniquity in different ways.
So there's two sacrifices mentioned in Leviticus. They are titled, very helpfully in most translations, guilt and sin. So notice the terminology being used here. Do not cover their guilt. That is God literally just putting something over it so nobody sees it. Guilt sacrifices in Leviticus are utilized when they are not necessarily an impure person, meaning that you are still of the congregation, you did it unintentionally, it was a mistake, please just wipe it away. Just cover it up and let it be. So that's a guilt offering. Don't just turn away from it, is what he's saying. Then he says a sin offering. Let not their sins be blotted out from your sight. Now, the way that is worded is this is a removal. You are literally taking the scroll that has all of their sins written on it, and you are covering everything in ink so that no one can ever read that again until we invented X-ray. Then we can. But that's the point. One of them, God covers it, still there, but nobody cares, including God. The other one, God literally removes the record of it. And that's a sin offering and a guilt offering. Now, we combine them under Christ. We don't separate them out. But when I went through Leviticus, I made a big deal about that because to the Jewish mind, they're not the same. You can, to use our terminology, you can sin against God and not need a sin offering because you're still considered clean. You just did something wrong. Guilt, no sin. Any questions, thoughts on the first 6 verses there? Verse 5 verses, I guess. Cool. So notice at this point, Nehemiah has given no response beyond talking to God. In verse 6 it says, so we built the wall, and the wall was all joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. So we're going to get a couple of, I think at least 3 times, it's going to say the wall was built, the wall was built, the wall was built. It's possible we're talking about it incrementally. It's also possible that each of these stories were compiled and presented, and then somebody just copied them all down. And so there was the story of Sanballat and Tobiah bad-mouthing me, and now that one was copied down. Then they built the wall. And the next one is, well, then they tried to come and kill us, and well, I'm going to write that one all down, and then they built the wall. And then we're going to get the next one, I think, in chapter 6. We'll get another one when the wall gets finished, and that one is after they are attempting to attack Nehemiah himself. So they're all very self-contained stories. Probably then, that's exactly what happened. Somebody wrote an article saying, hey, write this up. So they did, and they concluded with, we built the wall anyways. That's probably what verse 6 is getting at. Some scholars will say it was a half height, and then ultimately it's going to be a full height. They most argue against that, saying that no, it's a completion or non-completion. And so each of those endings are just coming in. But you'll hear some people say, why are they building the wall 3 times? And that's why I said all that. Any comments anybody has? Any thoughts? I saw it building.
I was just kind of thinking about, Levitical law versus New Testament and some of that with what you were talking about, guilt offerings, sin offerings, sort of thing. With this, too, I think of sort of the same category as imprecatory psalms and things like that. But he's asking for them to not be forgiven.
Yeah.
Don't forgive them. I'm asking you, God, to not forgive them. As Christians, that's not something we can do anymore. Same thing with like imprecatory assaults. Jesus, like all this was leading up to and pointing to Jesus eventually. We can't approach things that same way because that violates the forgiving and loving New Testament teachings. So it's just interesting how things have evolved and changed. But I can't imagine, I guess I can imagine, but one of us praying, do not forgive Josh for what he did to me.
It might be more honest.
It's pretty strong. It's pretty strong, really, when you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Good. Cool. Verse 7. So the next section here I call discouragement. So we're threats. That's just kind of, they're talking amongst themselves. I could have used a different word. I couldn't think of it. So if you know a better word, I'll fix my PowerPoint for next time. But discouragement, this is an active plan to slow them down, to fight against their morale. So in verse 7, when Sanballat, Tobiah, and the Arabs, and the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward, the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry. And they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. And we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. It's got a bit of a summary section for what we're going to get in the rest of chapter 4. But I included it here with discouragement because nothing's happened yet. But they hear things are coming. And that has an impact upon their morale. Now, 10 through 14 is really things that Jews are saying. And that's why you can see the effect of the discouragement upon what's going on. They hear that the armies are amassing and they're going to come and they're going to kill us. So now we have to set a guard. But that's not working well. So there's a shift here. When we get to the end of chapter 4, we're going to see them, half of them are on construction, half of them are working. Sometimes they're holding their weapon and working at the same time. So that seems to be the evolution out of this first section, where they set a guard and they have workers separate. But in Judah, verse 10, it is said that the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There's too much rubble. By ourselves, we will not be able to rebuild the wall. This is Jews, and this is what they are thinking. Nehemiah has come, he's driven them to do the work, they're motivated to do the work, but then all of these oppositions are coming in. They hear of gathering armies, they're going to come and they're going to kill us. We have holes in our walls, we can't defend ourselves. If I'm working all day lifting large stones, there's no way that I could fight somebody off with sword or spear. Like, it just wouldn't happen. I'd just fall over and be dead. That's what they're saying. The strength of those that are bearing the burdens is failing. It's possible because, like we said a moment ago, that verse 9, that he has set a guard and he has set construction, separate people. And that the construction people just cannot keep up anymore. There's not enough laborers. So some scholars read it that way. Others say it's just an overview of the whole chapter. Decide for yourselves. But we do know the morale. Sanballat and Tobiah and their cohort have been incredibly effective because the Jews are demoralized. They are talking about stopping. They're talking about quitting. Their enemies add in, verse 11. Our enemies said, so this is what the Jews are saying, they're hearing is being said. They will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. I mean, that makes sense. If you're out there and you are busy and you are working and you are hot and you're sweaty and you're just lucky to continue picking up and moving, you're not going to know anybody's walking up and going to stab you with a spear. There'd be no way. So that's what they're thinking. This is the two Jewish ideas going on inside of Jerusalem. We're never going to see them coming, and we're never going to get it built. Add on to this, verse 12, at that time, the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times. Now, what did they say? Somebody read theirs. You must return to us. Anybody want to argue with him? What did yours say? There's a couple of different translations of this. That's why I'm asking. Yep.
Wherever you turn, they will attack us.
There you go. You must return to us. Wherever you turn, they will attack us. You're going to have some variation on those two. That's why I asked it. So what does it mean? One, it means that we don't really understand what the Hebrew says. But the core of those words is we are in danger. Come help us. So if you remember back, it's been months now, in my Ezra class and at the beginning of Nehemiah, we also talked about it a little bit. One of the reasons that Zerubbabel was unable to build the foundation for a period of about 10 years is because of problems at home. There's soldiers and wars going on throughout the land of Canaan, and they're not safe. They're having a hard enough time feeding their family. The last thing they want to do is go build a floor. Like, that's just not a high priority. That's what we're talking about here. They have brought these workers in. All of the Jews that could came to Jerusalem to build this wall. Well, who's going to protect them at home then? Who's watching over your wife and your kids? Your elderly parents? Who's watching over those who were too sick? Sanballat and Tobiah is just going to kill everybody, and they're just going to walk through and kill them while you're up there building a wall that a fox could knock over. That's the discouragement going on. And these are things that the Jews are saying to themselves. So what's Nehemiah's response to this? Verse 13. So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in the open spaces, I stationed the people by their clans with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your home. Okay, so that's the end of my discouragement section. Verse 15 through the end is going to be imminent danger. They've gone from bad-mouthing us amongst themselves to, okay, we're hearing some stuff and we're responding to it, to there is a real possibility of troops mobilizing. So that's 15 to the end. Any comments on the discouragement section? Cool. When our enemies heard that it was known to us that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each to his work. From that day on, half of my servants worked on constructions, and half held the spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. The leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah, who were building on the wall. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon with the other. Each of the builders had his sword strapped to his side while he built. The man who sounded the trumpet was beside me. I said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, the work is great and widely spread, and we are separated on the wall far from one another. In the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So, the enemies have now heard that their plot is known. So they're going to go back to working. The Jews are. They're working, half of them are working on the construction, half of them are holding everybody's weaponry. They're stationed down there in open areas so that they can see what's coming and know what's about to happen. Even those who are on construction duty are still carrying spears and swords, because you may not be able to get to the guy who's got your gear. So they're still armed and they're still ready and motivated to keep on working. Where is the trumpet? Did you guys notice? The guy with the trumpet next to Nehemiah. And when they hear the trumpet, what does that tell them? Rally there. I don't know how to ask the question. So what can you deduce by Nehemiah saying the trumpet guy's with him? What are some things that you notice about that or think about that? Nothing? You can take immediate orders. One of the biggest dangers in the ancient world is false alarms. Can you just imagine a handful of guys from the enemy come up and everybody freaks out and they blow the trumpets and all of Jerusalem runs over that way to kill the 6 of them, and then the rest of the army comes from the other side. So there will be no confusion, there will be no false alarms. Nehemiah makes the call. Trumpet guys with me. What does that also mean? Where is Nehemiah when the attack happens? Nehemiah is in the thick of it. He's not leading from behind. He is going to the place, and when he starts sticking his spear into people, he says, all right, you can blow the trumpet now. There seems to be a lot of them. That's Nehemiah's perspective. What else can you learn? I like those two. What else did you guys notice? That's all I had to. I don't know. Sometimes people think differently. Okay. The work is great and widely spread, but our God will fight for us. Verse 21. So we labored at the work, and half of them held the spears, and from the break of dawn until the stars came out, I also said to the people at that time, let every man and his servant pass the night within Jerusalem, that they may be a guard for us by day and may labor by, or guard for us by night and may labor by day. So neither I, nor my brothers, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. Okay. So they're working dawn to dusk. Nobody goes home. Why is that so important? One, it keeps the city safe. But let's delve a little deeper. What were the concerns at home? They're unprotected. So you fathers, you have been sent to go and build a building in Nashville. But you're pretty sure that out of Pulaski, there is going to come an army to Columbia. If you stay in Nashville, you stay in Nashville. But if you came home, would you go back the next day? Some might. Most won't. 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. How long are you going to risk it with your family back here? Hoping that they're not dead when you come home. So no, everybody stays. Nobody goes home. That's true. You can install a home security system. It will prevent you from having to worry about Sanballat and Tobiah. All right. The end of verse 23 is a bit of an interesting thing. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. Anybody else have different translation of that? Doug's got something.
Yeah, King James talks about none of us took off our clothes except that we took them off for washing.
Okay. What else we got? This is another one of those weird Hebrewisms. And it seems to be something about we had our weapon in our power hand even while holding a cup. So it's like we are always ready. It may have just been one of those Hebrew idioms almost. Like we are always prepared. My sword's in my hand even when I'm just sitting there drinking at the fire and eating. Like I've still got my sword in my power hand, not just on my belt. So that's where the washing kind of gets in. I don't know, it gets very confusing because idioms don't translate.
Interestingly, the Air Force uses this in management classes. And one of the things that they point out is the first person possessing, my man, mine. The leader identifying with his man,
Yeah.
claiming kinship, ownership.
Yes. And especially because some of the accusations we're going to read against Nehemiah is Nehemiah, he was abusive and he took money from us and he ate really well, and so he constantly has to defend himself. This may be the beginning of that, but it is also him taking ownership, and I think that's exactly Nehemiah's perspective. He always thinks this is personal. These are my people, this is my city, this is my wall, this is my God, and I am going to do everything. Yeah. All right, any comments on chapter 4? Yeah, 25 minutes.
When our enemies heard that it was known to us, I guess maybe I missed it, how the enemies have known, unless there's spies in the Jerusalem camp, and then there's also spies in Sanballat's camp,
Yeah.
and they're letting each other know what's going on. Because I didn't read of any, like, revelation from God to Nehemiah that they're doing this.
No, and I don't want us to think that this is like, World War II, and you've got your camp, and we've got our camp, and we don't mix. No, they mixed a lot. These people from Samaria, you've got merchants still bringing goods down to Jerusalem. You've got Judah sending to Samaria. They're all still attempting to survive and moving all amongst each other. We're going to see Sanballat and Tobiah even walking in Jerusalem later in the book. So the lines are not clearly drawn. And so I hesitate even to go so far as to say spies. They're probably just Jews that were like, well, I took my grain up to Samaria and I heard Sanballat bad-mouthing us. And well, then some of his people came down here and they heard what we're doing now. And there is no hiding anything. Nobody's chasing them off. There is no, which is a good argument, there is no sovereignty of Jerusalem. Cool. Anything else? Let's talk about Messiah then. I know that's what you're all ready for. I told Rachel, Ezra turned into how did the Jews become a polytheistic nation into a monotheistic nation that is focused solely on worshiping of God and following his law to the point that they become unrighteous. That was Ezra. Nehemiah is turning into what's the Messiah? We're monotheistic. We're following God. We're oppressed at every side. Where's our Savior? So, some of the things we've already talked about, the early messiahs, I'm not going back over that. God's Messiah, looking at Cyrus, son of David, son of man. So those are very important terms, son of David, son of man. Cyrus is the model. He is the one that changed the book when God said he is Messiah. Whoa, everything changed. Messiah thought development. This is the last slide I think that we were looking at last Wednesday. So before the year 200, we don't have any writings. We just don't. Around 200 and following, we start to get some writings. Book of Enoch's coming in there. Psalms of Solomon are coming in there. Those are the two big ones that we've got a lot on. One, we've got full, pretty well complete records. And two, they talk a lot about we need somebody to come save me. And so we can learn a lot about how the Jews were thinking when they wrote these books. They're apocrypha books, means that they are not inspired. Even the Jews themselves did not view them as inspired. They viewed them as helpful religious books, but not Torah. So that was their stance. Christians went one step further, and we said they're garbage and not Bible. That's how far we went. They didn't go that far. They might, let's use our modern terms, they might have called it like a historical fiction. Some of it's true. Some of it's not. Okay, Book of Enoch has a lot about a savior figure. Animal apocalypse is the story of the Jews looking for the great savior. Lord of the sheep is used in there. Son of man is used in there. Terminology that Jesus is going to use quite heavily. Psalms of Solomon also are wrapping up in there. We looked at I didn't put it on this again. We looked at the quote from the Psalms of Solomon that they're looking for a son of David to come and kill all their enemies so that only the Jews are inside of their borders and nobody else. Everyone else is dead or on the outside and suffering. So that's in Psalms of Solomon. Okay, this is a new slide. Dead Sea Scrolls were like groundbreaking. I don't even know the right adjective to describe them. They changed the scholarly world. Not necessarily so much the religious world, but the scholarly world went nuts. And these are all terms that are used in their commentary sections. Not their just copies of the books of the Torah, but their actual comment sections where they're making their little notes on the side, or they're having arguments, or you've got the duats that are arguing with each other. Messiah, righteous one, chosen one, Son of Man, Son of God, God's servant, Prince of the congregation, branch of David, interpreter of the law, high priest. So all of those are all in there. That is what they thought Messiah was going to be. All right. On the right side, I've got 3 men, all of which take place around the time Jesus is between not born and 10, right in that range. So we're straddling the BC AD line historically. Judas, the son of Ezekias, is mentioned in Acts chapter 5 as a rebel. He was a potential Messiah. He rebelled against Herod the Great in early, just before Jesus was born, or probably around then. He was mostly just a raider, killing Romans. It's always a great pastime. They loved it. And his followers began to call him Messiah. And then he died. End of Messiah. So then we got another one, about 4 BC, Simon of Perea. He was a slave of Herod's. He rebels. He burns down the palace that's at Jericho. There is a writing stone where they wrote ink on stone, which is weird. Typically they don't do that, but we've got that, and it's called Gabriel's Revelation that claims Simon is Messiah. It's probably 50 or so AD is their guess, maybe a little later, of when that one was written. So his disciples very much thought he was Messiah, but he died. And then we have Athronges. His name's great, isn't it? 4 BC to 6 AD, arguably the most successful bandit. He literally was a bandit. He was in North Galilee area. He had a full 2-year open rebellion against Herod Archelaus, openly rebelling, calling himself king. He and his brothers were head and shoulders taller than everybody else. They were literal kings among them. And we don't actually know if he died, because Josephus recorded it for us, and Josephus just said, and his brother was killed, and his brother was killed, and his brother was killed, and the story ends. So we don't really know what happened to him. Josephus did not record it. We know he gets captured by Herod, and that's what we know. So these 3 guys, their disciples said, this is Messiah. I'm not even adding in anything with the Maccabees. This is literally Jesus is about to be born or has just been born. He's young. I mean, when Athronges comes out of the picture in 6 AD, you may be looking at 10-year-old Jesus and some of the stories around that, if you remember him at the temple, that time period. You know I must be about my Father's work. They have a Messiah that just got killed. So calling yourself Messiah was not necessarily uncommon in this transitional time. What is uncommon is for the Messiah figure to be anything other than zealot. What is the common factor between Judas, Simon, and Athronges? They were fighters. They killed Romans. They burned down the evil structures. They destroyed, and they helped the Jews survive. This is the Messiah they're looking for, but it is anchored in the zealot ideology. This is not the Messiah Pharisees would have wanted. They might have claimed so, but Pharisees were against all 3 of these guys. This is definitely not the Messiah Sadducees were looking for. I mean, Sadducees liked Rome and thought that Rome was the figurative kingdom of heaven, and that they should just, join it wholeheartedly and convert them all to Judaism and so forth. So that was Sadducee idea. This is a zealot. They were incredibly popular with the common people. Very popular. I mean, after all, it's literally a Robin Hood story. I'm going to come, I'm going to steal from the wealthy and give it to the poor. Thrungus, maybe, maybe not. There's some arguments there. He may have been really just a bandit, but he's called Messiah by his disciples that follow after him. So when Jesus is walking and large crowds start to gather, there's a reason that the Romans get nervous. There's a reason that the Pharisees and the Sadducees start getting nervous. Because they were all alive for these. They were probably involved in, smoothing things over with the Roman officials. And oh no, everything's okay, because they might have been in their 30s at the time that these guys were in there fighting. So that's why they get so worried. That's why we get such a Roman focus when Jesus goes to the cross. Because they have to be very clear, this is not our Messiah. And what did Pilate put above his head? King of the Jews. Now, if we don't know our history, we might look at that and we might like, oh, that's kind of weird. I guess he claimed it, I don't know. This is what Pilate's thinking. You know how many kings of the Jews we've killed? You know how many messiahs we've killed? This is the first one you asked us to kill, but It's kind of thumbing his nose at him. All right, any comments about anything on the screen? Yeah.
Would any of their groups of followers has been as big as Jesus' following? I mean, he's feeding 5,000 people, not including women and children. So.
No. And the simple reason is the big difference between Jesus and them is that these three men had to hide. Jesus doesn't really hide. He doesn't necessarily stand in public. He might be in the wilderness and just traveling quite a bit, but he's not really hiding. And so the following of Jesus is allowed to be much more peaceful, where anybody who really wanted them to be Messiah grabbed weapons and went into the wilderness to live with them. So no, their followings would not have been nearly as large. I think Judas's would probably have been the largest, but not like what we see Jesus drawing.
His followers drew more, I guess, anxiety
Yeah.
and leadership because of the size. And if he's doing this openly, what's he doing in secret?
And historically, who are the soldiers of the Jews? The farmers, the ranchers, the normal folk. They are the warriors historically, all through Judges, much of the kings even. That's where the warriors come from. You got a small standing army, but those are the fighters. And if he's massing together 5,000 men at one location, not including women and children, this is 5,000 is a legion in the first century. That is a legion of Roman soldiers. Yeah, I'd be pretty nervous too. Because historically, Messiahs end very bloody. And very bloody for the Jews. I want to say it's a Thrungus, that one of the future, no, he's not, I can't think of the Roman guy's name. He becomes very popular later. I think his name starts with a V, but I can't remember it. He comes down and massacres Jews, just left and right, destroying this full rebellion and then just killing people. So the massacres and the blood that flowed with these, from the Romans especially, would have been pretty high. So yeah, by the time that we get to 30-odd AD, they do not want a rebellion, even though 40 years later they're going to have one. And it does not go well. All right. So this is where I want us to end tonight. I have 2 slides called Jesus the False Messiah. I got real excited about this, and I fell down a very dark rabbit hole of reading Jewish websites where scholars that are Jews say this is why we don't think Jesus is the Messiah. Some of them are really well written and very polite. Others are not, and I got a little hot under the collar. But their arguments boil down to four primary arguments. Argument number one is that the Messiah is supposed to do four specific things, and Jesus does not do them. Ezekiel 37 says that he will build the third temple. That's not really what it says. It says that he will come and he will make his sanctuary among them, or he will dwell with them. Some of our translations will say. They would consider that a Christianized translation and would prefer the he will make his sanctuary among them. Okay, I mean, that's fair. That sounds like, people that are used to using these terms, that sounds like he's going to come and he's going to build another place of worship. It's exactly what it sounds like. Jesus has some arguments against it. What are some of the things Jesus talks about, or his apostles talk about, regarding the building or making his sanctuary among them? What do you guys remember? Yeah. Ooh, good argument. Yep. We are the temple, which means he dwells with us. That's a good connection. He's the cornerstone. The apostles are stones. We're stones. It's a literal building there. Oh, yeah. Now, their argument is he built nothing. Because Jesus didn't. I don't think we can argue that one, right? He may be the son of a carpenter, but we have nothing that he ever built. But what he built was not physical. It was spiritual. They would have argued that that's a Christianized way of looking at it. There will come a time you will worship me in spirit and in truth. Yeah. Yeah. Meaning, he is not the Messiah to the Jews. Point number two, that he is going to gather all Jews to live inside of the boundary of Israel. That is Isaiah 43. It says that I will go to the north and to the south, and I will call you from there. I will go to the east and the west, and I will call you from there, so that all will live here in the boundary of my kingdom. Jesus does not do that. I argued that Isaiah 43 has a lot to do with coming out of exile, but, you know, it is a messianic section. They argue that Isaiah chapter 2 and verse 4 says that there will be world peace. These are some of the passages we looked at last time. Wolves and sheep lying together, children and lions lying together. Nobody is going to, be at war. No nation will go against other nations. He will be the great mediator, the go-between to settle all issues. They're going to take their swords and make them into plow shards and so forth. Jesus did not bring world peace. In fact, what does some of the things Jesus says? I didn't come to bring peace. I came to bring a sword. Arguably what the zealots were wanting, but, his sword wasn't stabbing a Roman, so then they decided they didn't like him anymore. He would be king of all the earth, Zechariah 14:9. All peoples will become one. Now this one gets fun, because there is an argument that they make later that includes Christians and Islam into trying to fulfill Zechariah's prophecy of bringing all of the world and making them under one God with one name. So, Jesus does not do these three, or these four, is their argument. What would you say? Mm-hmm.
Are all combined into Jews and Gentiles being reconciled together. There's peace between them. All the earth, Jews and Gentiles make up all the earth. All Jews, all the righteous coming together in one. Same thing in the church.
One of the problems I ran into is the Christian argument that the Jews argued against is premillennialist. They said, well, Christians will always say, when he comes again, he'll put his temple here and reign, and everybody will be his. And they said that in article after article after article, and I'm like, I don't even believe that. So we don't even have a common frame of what we're arguing against. But that's what their top 4 arguments are. The Messiah is supposed to do these 4 things. There's going to be a physical temple, physical Jews will be in Israel, physical world peace will be had. He will be a physical king over all of the globe. Well, Jesus did not do those. So he cannot be Messiah, kill him. That's the argument. Any questions or comments on the tasks? His qualifications. He has 3 primary qualifications. Number 1, he will be the greatest prophet. Isaiah 11:2 says, all glory, all understanding, all knowledge, all wisdom has been given to this guy. Jesus is not the greatest prophet, is their argument. Makes very few prophecies. One of the only prophecies that they allow, and they say, yeah, he was right about this, is Jerusalem's going to get destroyed. They'll say, yeah, that was a prophecy. So maybe he was a prophet then. Saul was amongst the prophets. That doesn't make him a good guy. It just means that God used him, right? So, some of those arguments in there. He's going to be a descendant of David. They argue, Christians say he's born of a virgin. Can't be descendant of David because that comes through the father's line. That's a fun argument. They argue, even if you assume that Joseph's lineage is applied, he's through the wrong king, Jeconiah, I want to say. And then you have the other one in Luke. Maybe that's Mary's. It claims to be Joseph's. This is their argument. So even that one still goes through Nathan, doesn't go through Solomon. The promise is given to Solomon and his descendants. So he's not descendant of David according to the way the Jews organized that. And Torah observance. He is going to be the one that makes the observance of the Torah 100% in the world. And the Jews say, have you read the Gospels? Jesus goes against the Torah all over the place. John 9 is one of those places where Jesus makes paste on the Sabbath day to cure a man's blindness. And the Pharisees say, well, we got to kill him. He broke the Sabbath, can't be Messiah. Messiah is all perfect and will make all of the Torah perfect. But notice, what are they arguing against? They're arguing that the oral tradition and the Gemara have to be followed as well. But they're not. Any questions on those 3? Yes.
Jews never accepted the Torah itself. Some of them were against it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. But the Messiah has to be better. And so they would argue the Messiah has not come yet. Even here, 2024, he's not come. This is taken from the Psalms of Solomon, Teshuvah, chapter 9, verse 2. For these reasons, all Israel, in particular their prophets and their sages, have yearned for the Messianic age so that they can rest from the oppression of the Gentile kingdoms who do not allow them to occupy themselves with Torah and mitzvot properly. They will find rest and increase their knowledge in order to merit the world to come. In that era, knowledge, wisdom, and truth will become abundant. They quote from Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. These changes will come about because the king who will arise from David's descendants will be a great master of knowledge, greater master of knowledge, than Solomon, and a great prophet close to the level of Moses, our teacher. I love that one. Therefore, he will teach the entire nation and instruct them in the path of God. All the Gentile nations will come to hear him, Isaiah 2. And nevertheless, the ultimate of all reward and the final good, which will have no end or decrease, is the life of the world to come. In contrast, the Messianic age will be life within the context of this world, with the world following its natural pattern, except that sovereignty will return to Israel. The sages of the previous generations have already declared there is no difference between the present age and the Messianic era, except from our subjugation to the Gentile kingdoms. So the argument of the Psalms of Solomon is, we're looking for a guy who's going to destroy the Gentiles and then attract them all to himself, rule from Israel, and Israel will never again be in subjection to a foreign nation. That's what they're looking for. All right. We'll go to the next slide next time. Bye, y'all.
The hour is at hand.